You are watching Metropole Television. My name is Elijah Charles Kiage. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. This is your economic review where we get to tell you the biggest headlines that you are waking up to this morning. Some of them that are going to shape the way in which you carry your activities today, and for how the final quarter of this year is going to shape business-wise. All right, let me introduce that first story before I introduce the panel that is joining us this morning. Now, alcohol manufacturers have petitioned the government to lift the restrictions on bar operating hours as the COVID-19 positivity rate has dropped below 5% and vaccination increased in recent times. This comes barely 2 months after bar owners backed the motion in the National Assembly on revising the current COVID-19 restrictions, urging the government to ease measures imposed and ramp up vaccination. Now, the manufacturers argue that allowing bars and restaurants to operate longer would create more employment opportunities and help businesses in the hard-hit sectors recover and become competitive. Alcoholic Beverages Association of Kenya Chairman Eric Githua told the National Emergency Response Committee that increasing the availability of licensed alcohol would also help keep customers away from the illicit variety whose consumption has grown over the pandemic. At the same time, ANC party leader Musalia Mudavadi has called on President Uhuru Kenyatta to lift the ongoing nationwide curfew as Kenyans cannot continue bearing the economic hardships anymore. According to Mudavadi, the nationwide curfew is aggravating life that is already unbearable. Let's listen before we come in and talk about this story.
Ya kwamba zile numbers za wanaoathirika zimerudi chini, bado tutaendelea kuvaa mabarakoa, tutaendelea kujaribu tusikaribiane, lakini naona curfew imeishiwa na wakati wake.
It is clear from what members have said that the economic hardships continue to bite several sectors of our economy. The transport sector, the small-scale trader sector, the hospitality sector, and the message that is coming through is that it is time that the curfew is lifted. We are not saying that COVID guidelines should not be observed. The issue of the masks and the necessary precautions must continue to be taken as we move forward.
Fantastic. Let me introduce the panel that is joining us this morning. We do have Churchill Ogutu, who is an economist at IC Asset Managers. Churchill, good morning, sir.
Morning to you. How are you?
Fantastic. Happy to have you around. We also have Peter CHALICHA, who's the chairman at NANDI Owners Bar Association. Good morning, Mr. CHALICHA.
Good morning, Metro.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Let's look at this data set that we have for you this morning in terms of the way that the economy has performed within the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can actually say that we closed 2020 at a 0.3% contraction of the economy. Again, if we go back to 2020, quarter 2 and quarter 3, that you can actually see exactly where we are coming from. In terms of that growth, we're talking about 2015 to 2019, that you can actually track how we have grown. Fantastic. Then let's introduce this subject. Peter, let me start with you this morning. You are saying end the curfew and lift the restrictions of operation in your specific industry. What is the justification behind this argument, Mr. CHALICHA?
Well, thank you, Metro TV, for this. Actually, as our industry, that is alcoholic industry, we just felt actually we've done actually enough so that to see to it that this one is lifted. For example, we've had so many people in our industry vaccinated, and you can see we're now acclimatized to the situation of putting on masks and keeping distances, and it has come a norm of the day. And as the things is, you can see the number is now reducing at the rate of 5%. We feel the economy now should be opened, and in fact, it is also a way that we will also be interacting with as many people as possible and encouraging them to see that they get vaccinated as much as it is. Otherwise, as we continue having the restrictions,
Yes.
we are no longer now taking. We are now no longer now taking. It is now no longer profiting us as people, but instead it's profiting the pockets of the police, because police are taking advantage of the same. Thank you.
Yes, CHALICHA, just before I bring in Churchill on the overall effect of the curfew on the business operations in the country, do you still consider your business, I'm talking about these bars, as a potential hotspot for infections, which is why the government is still saying, well, we have to continue restricting the way in which you operate and even cut down the hours that you operate until we are quite sort of confident that the vaccinated numbers are high in the country?
I think it is, don't count a situation where bar is a hotspot.
Yes.
In the sense, now you can see, you can actually not count a bar as a hotspot when you see people flocking in the supermarkets, in the vehicles, the way now they are sitting in the vehicles.
Yes.
It's not even, you cannot even compare it with the people sitting in a bar. You
Yes.
can easily control those who are sitting in a bar, but you cannot control those in the matatu.
CHALICHA, I'm sorry to cut you short there, sir. The argument is that even in these other places, it's possible for you to say, well, put on your mask. But every time you're in a bar, in a restaurant, you are actually not allowed to put on your mask. You got to remove your mask for you to enjoy the services of these areas.
We started, we as Balita,
Yes.
we started a situation whereby in our bars or in our clubs, we control first the number of people that enter those places.
Yes.
So that we are able to control them, we are able to foresee them, and we put maximum security for the same. Nevertheless, I wanted also to maybe make a call to the government,
Yes.
or the Minister of Health, if we can also create maybe vaccination spots just centered around where our bars are, so that it can also be easy for us to maybe to be referring people for vaccination. Otherwise, we really want the economy to be open, keeping in mind that we've made a lot of loss. We've made tremendous loss. You can see people have lost job. Things are not working well on our side.
Pretty much. Churchill, let me bring you in overally, therefore, on the efficacy of the ongoing curfew. What we do know is that it was extended for the next 30 days. But you can hear Salia Mudavadi is saying, well, it has lost meaning now, that it should be lifted. Should we lift the curfew?
Let me start by coming to Peter's defense. I think some of the examples that he puts out there, be it supermarkets or in the vehicles, it pales into comparison. If you look at the spread events that you've been seeing,
Yes.
political rallies, and that, I mean, no one wears masks and they're in masses. So to us, it's basically, it comes to us like it's a political decision, this whole issue around the curfew, because during the day you find that people are flocking through whatever political divide one is, people are just flocking into the rallies. But during the day, during that nighttime period, as Peter had said, at least is starting to state that the efficacy or that industry is trying to put in places controls such that people may and to reduce the spread of COVID-19.
Yes.
That is looking at it overall. Where are we in terms of vaccination? We are still slow. I think right now we are below 3% of the overall population that have fully received the vaccination, as opposed to by the end of September, every country should have been at 10%. That was the threshold. And then by the end of December at 40%. We are still crawling slowly towards those thresholds. So the focus should be actually on ensuring that this vaccination or people are receiving the full vaccination, such that it can be able to ensure that even if there's a full reopening or the lifting of the curfew, in as much as some specific sectors such as Peters, where they're saying that their employees are fully vaccinated, but you're not sure about the customers who are coming to those joints. So at least the bare minimum, at least we need to ensure that people are vaccinated, such that by the time we are lifting the curfew, we are at least better placed to handle the control of COVID-19.
Yes, but Churchill, then the efficacy of this ongoing curfew, I mean, we are saying that infection rates are now getting lower and lower. Is that reason enough for us to say, well, just take out the curfew, increase the vaccination drive then?
I think to an extent, we need to get our vaccination right on track. And if you see in the developed markets, where pretty much they are fully reopened, you've seen in England, stadiums, people are going back in masses. Those countries, they have evidence enough that the vaccination has been pretty much rolled out.
Yes.
So countries such as Kenya, for us at least to ensure that that safety, that the vaccination, or rather that the COVID-19 is pretty much spread out, we need to ensure that at the bare minimum, our vaccination is right on track. I'm not saying that vaccination will be able to reduce the efficacy, or even right now, as the numbers are trending downwards, it's not giving us some comfort that we need to rush and bring up the lift the curfew. But at the bare minimum, at least, because at the heart of it, COVID-19 is a health pandemic. So we need to ensure that people are, at least at the bare minimum, they are safe enough to be able to venture outward, to protect themselves and also to protect other people that they'll be interacting with. So
Yes.
that to me, is the sequence that needs to be put in place before the complete lifting of the curfew.
Pretty much. Let me introduce the conversation. Gabriel MWENDWA is an investment associate. Gabriel, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Simba. How are you doing?
Fantastic, man. Happy to have you around. Musalia Mudavadi is saying, I mean, lift the curfew. It's not helping. I mean, focus on the vaccination drive in the country. Do you support lifting the curfew? And if somebody want to ask you on a personal level, Gabriel, the efficacy of the ongoing curfew in mitigating the number of infections in the country, do you have a footing to defend it?
So I think I'll agree with the politician that then we just need the curfew gone entirely. And this is something I was even saying even much earlier, because you know, you also need to look at our social construct.
Yes.
And what is actually leading to the spread of this virus. It's not necessarily activity among groups of people who go out clubbing, etc., which is what essentially the curfew is trying to prevent, because that's a very small group of people and they do go out regardless. But it's actually the political activity. You know, you're seeing rallies and, you know, those are massive gatherings, multitudes flowing from town to town. So if we can have that during the day, then I don't see what worse danger there is in the night. So I'm all for lifting it off completely.
Yes.
Because we need to give people room to continue with their different economic activities, which have thoroughly been curtailed by the continuation of curfew.
Pretty much. All right, Mr. CHALICHA, let me just come back to you on that as well. Your specific industry has been the one that has been heavily affected by this curfews and the limitation and operation hours. Do you feel that should that be lifted now, probably you'll be able to make amends before the end of the year? Can you get me, Mr. CHALICHA?
I beg your pardon?
Fantastic. I can hear you now. So the question is, should the curfew be lifted? Because that's exactly what you're fighting for. And also the reduction in the restrictions that are also extended to your industry right now. Is it enough for you to recover or recoup the losses that you've actually made since 2020 to date?
Well, the loss that we've actually got as our industry on our part, lifting the curfew does not mean that actually we are going to recoup
Yes.
within that period. But however, it is going to restart an economy. It is going to restart a person's life. It's going to restart a business. It's going to restart a life. So that is what we want actually to see as something that we've now started growing the economy.
Yes.
The economy, we contribute a lot in the growth of economy.
You have actually approached the government to sort of use different strategies when it comes to mitigating the coronavirus pandemic infections in your various establishments. One of those was you're giving us this morning is that, well, you should actually introduce vaccination centers at this area so that we are in the forefront in helping you vaccinate the people who come to these points. Are they adopting it, or they're still hot and cold with your proposals?
Okay, I think with time maybe they'll do it.
Yes.
But I want to maybe to a little bit go back and look at the situation where we advised them to co-opt us in the committee for the same.
Yes.
And actually after doing it, you can see the results for yourself. And now at this time, I'll also want to encourage the government to try to co-opt us as bar owners to be in the vaccination program, you see, so that we can be able to tell our people, we can easily interact with our people than what they are doing at the moment, and we can actually succeed. And especially with that idea of putting centers, vaccination centers near where we are.
Yes.
I think we can go far and we can succeed. And
Pretty
that
much.
is the way to.
Churchill, somebody's going to ask you the question. I mean, we have operated with the curfew now for more than 1 year. And if you look at the projections for the economic growth even this year, it's all as if that the curfew has been factored in. It looks as if the economy has settled to operating with this curfew. So the question is, to what level, therefore, is the economy still feeling the effects of the current or the ongoing curfew? Because it looks as if even Treasury doesn't factor that in. In fact, if you look at the numbers this year, they're projecting for us to grow by 6.2%, devoid of the curfew.
Yes, that's an interesting question. And if I take you back to the 2020 numbers, whereby the growth was a contraction of 0.3%,
Yes.
the first contraction in like 2 decades. But it masks even some of the sectors that bore the fullest brunt of the curfew's restrictions. And if I may just pull out the sector that's accommodation and services, that's lies squarely to Peter's industry. It slumped close to 48% over the course of last year.
Yes.
I mean, that just by itself tells us that some sectors were negatively affected because of by the restrictions than others. So I think sometime this week we'll be able to get the numbers for the first quarter and the second quarter, just to get a sense of how the recovery has been. But having said that, looking at some of the numbers that have been put out this year, we've seen that there's usually it mirrors whatever restrictions that are being put in place. If I take you back to around March to May, whereby the president now introduced some restrictions of movements in 5 counties, and then one of the economic indicators that was there, PMI, now slumped in tandem to that. So those are some of the activities whereby people negatively react whenever there's a reintroduction of stricter restrictions in the economy. So we'll quite see the numbers to see how each of those sectors that were negatively impacted over the course of last year, how they have completely recovered, or there's some semblance of recovery once the numbers have been put out. But that said, looking at the overall headline numbers that have been put out might just be misleading at the moment.
Pretty much. At this point, I would like to say thank you very much to you, Mr. Peter CHALICHA, who's the chairman, NANDI Bar Owners Association, for joining us this morning for this conversation. Your contribution has been quite invaluable this morning, sir. All right, and then we move on with Churchill, Ogutu, and Gabriel MWENDWA this morning. Now, the price of fuel might drop further in the country if a bill proposing value-added tax on the commodity halved from from 8% to 4% is adopted by Parliament. In further changes to the pricing of the commodity in the country, the National Assembly Committee on Finance and National Planning also proposes that fuel should also be exempt from the annual review of inflation tax. Under the proposals, the changes to the law will also effectively exempt petrol, diesel and kerosene from the excisable goods under the Excise Duty Act of 2015, with the levy that was recently declared illegal also proposed to be slashed from the current 5 shillings and 40 cents per litre to 2 shillings and 90 cents. Currently, VAT accounts for 9 shillings and 98 cents for every litre of super petrol and 8 shillings and 56 cents per litre of diesel. Now, the second biggest tax item on fuel after excise duty and road maintenance. This, as Treasury indicated, that they will be forced to seek an additional 37.6 billion to plug a budget deficit as a result of the reduction in fuel and cooking gas levies and taxes. Let's look at those levies and taxes this morning before we bring in Gabriel MWENDWA on that. You can actually see taxes on a litre of selected fuels on VAT, that's 9 shillings and 42 cents. On diesel, that accounts to 7 shillings and 97 cents, and kerosene 7 shillings and 25 cents as well. Let's move on to the levies on that particular product. You can see that on a litre of petrol, that is 26 shillings and 85 cents on levy, and 26 shillings and 63 cents on diesel, and 21 shillings and 49 cents on a kerosene. If you look at that particular trend on those levies from 2015 to 2020, you can actually say that comparatively it has therefore increased for those 5 years. Now let's address that elephant in the room, the 37 billion shillings budget deficit. Let's look at that gap in financing, and we're going to look at the actual money that we've spent vis-a-vis the approved budget, and we're going to track it all the way from 2017 to 2021, and you can actually say that the budget readings vis-a-vis the actual amount of money that we get to spend have always gone on a high, all the way from 2017 to 2021, and that's where the worry comes from Treasury, saying that if these proposals pass, then we are opening a further hole. That would mean that Treasury is going to look for more money to fill in these gaps, therefore creating a disparity between the approved and the actual money that we get to spend in each financial year. Gabriel, the cost of energy and the cost of fuel in this country has been an ongoing conversation up to the latest review by EPRA that shows that they actually did see us spend 5 shillings less for both diesel and petrol in this country. But the conversations again on the cost of power are ongoing, and we're going to see whether indeed it's a true conversation as of December this year. But let's go back to the cost of fuel in this country. The Committee on Finance is saying, well, half those taxes, you're going to find it very easy for you to mitigate the cost of fuel in the country. Treasury is saying, you see, you have that, you open a 37 billion financing deficit in the country, and we don't want to borrow more for us to finance our budget. 50-50, which way to go?
So it's an interesting question, the way you put it, Simba. And of course, it's a dilemma for the government. One side is to appease the public,
yes,
and the other is to, again, appease the public by not borrowing. So it's just a matter of how they do it. So from where I sit is, these taxes were introduced by the same people who are trying to, sort of repeal them. And I think, and my hope is that where they end up is not what they're proposing, because if they have the VAT now, and we know why they will be doing that, it's because of political mileage, whether it's for people in the current government or for the current government. We can guarantee each other that by 2023, those taxes are going to be back.
Yes.
So it's not really long-serving. It's not really what we'll be looking to have as an economy, because it creates a lot of instability and bad planning among key players in the sector. Now, what I think would be best is, even the subsidy that we are getting, it added 5 shillings to the cost of this fuel.
Yes.
So, for example, the saving from VAT, from having VAT, is going to be shy of 5 shillings on petrol. Yet the subsidy program itself is costing us that much. So you just added 5 shillings to the cost, and then now you're looking for where to take it out, or you're even using the same subsidy you're giving us to try and bring down the price. But it's also something that is counterintuitive because it's pushing up the price. So my sentiment would be that I think they should link the taxes as well as the subsidy to the global crude prices. So if crude prices are below a certain level, you can then have even VAT. I know legally speaking it's harder, but you can have the subsidy kick in. You can have VAT kick in if the crude prices are below a certain level. But if they cross a certain threshold, then you should take all of them out. You should say that as long as the price has crossed this level, there's no charges for the subsidy. And maybe then, legally speaking, because the review is monthly, EPRA consults with Parliament and has an approval to sort of put aside VAT, depending on the prevailing crude prices. And that way, it will not be an emotional or political activity every time we're going into this cycle. Because that is what is going to happen. I mean, personally, as a consumer, I'll be more than happy now to have the prices go down. But I know they're going to come up again in future, or we're going to have to borrow as a government to continue meeting that gap. And remember, there's no even consideration by Treasury to tell you that we will try find maybe this 37 billion will borrow half, and the other half will try squeeze the belt of government expenditure. There's no such plan. That's the thing. The thing they know they should do that is the best solution has never, ever been a consideration of something to do. They just keep spending money, whether it's on recurrent expenditure or on things that are being declared illegal every day. So yeah, that's where we're stuck. But I think we need a more robust formula which allows for taxes and other costs to vary subject to crude prices.
Yes, pretty much. Churchill, when Ukur Yatani was tabling the latest sectoral participation in the budget document for 2022-2023, he actually did say that for the very first time, he actually wants to stick to that budget deficit, 5.7%. And he said, we can't keep on borrowing. We have to just find ways of reducing our ability or our move to borrow, to budget, to finance our budget. And then he comes back and says, well, the cost of fuel in the country also has to be managed. But then the National House wants to cut that tax by half. They are also introducing that levy. They want to cut it from 5 shillings and 40 cents to just 2 shillings and 90 cents. So Ukur Yatani is looking at it and saying, well, there goes my budget deficit again out of the door if they actually get to pass this. But then the question should be, can we find a solution to the cost of energy and fuel in this country without necessarily, number one, overtaxing, and number two, over borrowing?
Thanks. I think the solution can be arrived through those routes. And if I look at the numbers that have been put out there, that the slashing of the VAT, the slashing of petroleum development levy will lead to a deficit of 37.8 billion.
Yes.
I think that's a simplistic argument in the sense that, and I had the opportunity of looking at that report that was put out by the Finance and National Planning Committee,
yes,
where they did some scenario analysis. On one side, they were looking at where the prices were. That was for the month of August. That was around September to October period, where it hit a high of 134 shillings.
Yes.
And then they compared it if the taxes were as per what they had been proposed, petroleum development levy from 5 shillings and 40 cents to 2 shillings and 90 cents, and also the halving of the VAT from 8% to 4%. But then the thing is, if petrol is 134 shillings as compared to if petrol is 115 shillings, because that was the numbers they are using, people will consume more petrol if it's at a lower price and that's the concept about price elasticity, which
Yes.
is missed out completely. If petrol is higher, of course, less people will consume the fuel products as compared if it's lower. So you find that the mathematics is not as simple as just a reduction of 37 billion shillings.
Yes.
We could even see that it's narrowing to around 21 billion or even 20 billion, which is still manageable compared to if you look at the whole dynamics of the budget finances every financial year, whereby the budget that is out there, we don't end up utilizing it to the full. So to me, I think if you look at it comprehensively, it's something that is quite manageable. Reducing the taxes of fuel because it has a ripple impact in various sectors of the economy as compared to where it is, whereby people are not even consuming the fuel, as if the prices are still elevated as where they were between September to October period.
Yes.
So to me, I think that if we look at it comprehensively, there are routes we can still stick to the fiscal deficit of 5.7% that Yatani still needs to stick with as the current Jubilee administrations come to an end by sometime next year, June. So I think it's still in order to reduce the taxes, but still not even worry too much about fiscal consolidation going off track.
Pretty much. Churchill, how do you respond to critics who say that when it comes to fuel and fuel consumption in the country, you can apply price elasticity in the sense that whether it's high or low, the quotas of consumption are pretty much known in each financial year?
Yes, I think that comes into play. And let me give you a good example, still matters fuel. We had the anti-adulteration levy that was introduced, I think in fiscal 2017, 2018, thereabouts.
Yes.
I don't remember the exact fiscal year, where it was put at 18 shillings per litre to match what is there in the petroleum development levy, which is now applicable. Anti-adulteration levy was to be applicable to kerosene, whereas petroleum development levy applicable to super and diesel. So the thing was now at least to reduce what people used to do, put kerosene into the other products, dilute it. But what you've seen, even the taxes from anti-adulteration levy, for the last financial year, it was around 2.2 billion.
Yes.
So all the taxes and levies that came around from all these taxes and levies that were going towards petroleum products, it totaled 232 billion thereabouts, of which 2 billion was just anti-adulteration levy. So that tells to me that people are not consuming much kerosene even in the last financial year, and it happened with the introduction of this anti-adulteration levy for kerosene. So that, to me, is the price elasticity. The more you increase taxes and levies, the more people are not consuming that particular product.
Yes.
But if you reduce it, people will now at least will get some more disposable income in their pockets, or they'll get that incentive at least to go to consume those products. And that's the conversation that, to me, didn't come out clearly in that particular report that was tabled in Parliament.
Pretty much. Now, once we come back, Gabriel, that committee is also proposing that fuel should be exempt from VAT, from inflationary adjustment that the KRA gets to go into each and every year. Now, what we do know, that adjustment was actually stopped this year when the High Court declared it dangerous owing to the effects of the coronavirus pandemic on the economy. But once we come back, are they being over ambitious by saying that in this country, fuel should be inflationary VAT adjustment exempt? Once we come back here on a Business AM and look at the performance of the banking industry in the country, they are working in numbers. If you look at those first 7 months of this year and ask ourselves the question, is the economy back? Going by how those boys are performing in the banking industry. You're still watching Business AM.